Okay, up and running. All right, so we are still in chapter 1 of Moed Katan, and we are on Mishnah 8. A quick reminder or introduction, if you weren't here last week when we began Moed Katan, we're talking about the period during holidays that is not the actual day of Yom Tov, not the actual day of the holiday, but the intermediate days, what we call in modern halacha, Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of a festival. And there is a general feeling or a general principle that we should not work on those days, but the prohibition on work is not the same as the prohibition of work is on Shabbat, or the prohibition of work is on Yom Tov itself. Remember, Shabbat and Yom Tov are very, very similar, except for when it comes to food preparation. This is more of a, well, yes, you can do work, but you shouldn't do work. And we talked about some of the principles that the rabbis do say of when work is permitted, when it would prevent a great loss, when the work itself is not very consequential or not very difficult, and when the work itself doesn't overshadow the flavor of the holiday. That's why just in Mishnah 7, we talked about not getting married during Chol HaMoed, because then you are taking a new happiness and you are overlapping it with the happiness of the holiday, and that kind of rubs out the holiday happiness, and we're not supposed to supersede that. We're not supposed to supplant that. We're not supposed to replace the holiday's own flavor. Make sense? Okay, so that was the review. With that in mind, chapter 1, Mishnah 8, I need a volunteer to read, because that way I've got someone to interrupt. You're going to go round robin? All right. And remember, you can always say no thank you if you would rather not read, for the group. But Yerach, if you wouldn't mind starting then.
Mishnah 8. An ordinary person may sue in the usual...
So.
Here it's S-E-W.
That, we pronounce that as so.
So?
It's English. No, I'm saying English is crazy, right? So it's like it's the same way we pronounce it as, so, even though it looks like the word few, it's just the way we pronounce it in English. So.
I thought so is with S-A-W.
No, that's saw.
Yeah.
So and saw are two different
English
things.
Class or
yes.
Remember, I used to teach English, right? 4 years of my life I spent teaching English. So,
in the usual way, but the craftsmen may sew only using uneven stitches.
All right. So that's S-O-W. Sorry, S-O. S-O-W would be sow. So what are we talking about when we sew here? What we're talking about is when you're sewing with needle and thread, right? Like, if you have to fix something or even make something, what counts as work? Well, the question is, are you an expert at sewing? Are you somebody who is good at sewing? Or are you not so good at sewing? If you're not so good at sewing, just a regular person, you sew every now and then, but it's not your job, then yeah, go ahead and sew. You're fine, right? Because you don't know the full skills. You're not going to make something that looks perfect. You're not going to be doing work that is of considerable value to anyone, even yourself. But if you are an expert, you have to deliberately sew in a less expert way, right? So normally you might sew these perfect stitches. You might be putting like the needle through like 4 or 5 stitches at once and pulling it out, and they're all nice and even and straight and all of that. And on Chol HaMoed, on Moed Katan, no.
It makes sense, because this is like work. You're working.
Yeah.
Exactly right. this is something when people talk to me about keeping Shabbat, which is a different level of prohibition, but it's a similar theme. And they say, oh, but on Shabbat, I want to be able to read my emails, and I want to be able to go online and read the news and all of that. I say, but isn't that what you do Sunday through Friday? Right? Or isn't that for many people what their job is? Yeah. Right? They sit in front of a computer all day for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, and that's what they do to make a living. And then Shabbat rolls around, and they're going to pull themselves up to the computer with the keyboard and mouse. No, I mean, even if we're not talking about Shabbat prohibition, just change what you're doing, right? Because it's going to feel too much like work. So yes, if you're an expert sewer, if you are a seamstress or a tailor, then you can sew, but don't sew in the perfect way, sow in an uneven way. And the Talmud goes into details of what those different ways might look like, but the basic principle is don't do your job when you're doing this, even if you have to sow, because maybe your clothes tore and you need to look good before, the going to shul or something. But still, don't sow it so well. Good? Good.
Okay.
Onward.
2. And they may weave the ropes of a bed.
Go ahead and read Rabbi Yosef.
Rabbi Yosef say they may even be tightened.
Okay. So I don't know if you've ever been to like St. Augustine or any place else that has one of those historic areas where they show you how people used to live, right?
Beds.
Yeah, what beds used to look like, right? Nowadays beds, we have these lovely mattresses and memory foam this and all of this and the adjustable, and it's amazing, right? In the old days, your bed was made up of ropes.
Oh, that's right.
And there would be, the ropes would go up and up, or, over and under like a loose weave. And what you would do is you would have little pegs and you would tighten the ropes. And that's how you would make the bed be firm so that you wouldn't just sink to the ground. And so the question is, on Moed Katan, what can you do? Can I weave the ropes or can I tighten the ropes? What is permitted? And the basic position is, yes, you're allowed to weave the ropes on this, even though that looks like work and you're making the bed, more than the modern making the bed with the sheets, right? You're actually making the bed a bed. It's still permitted because otherwise, where are you sleeping, right? On the ground? That's not the right mood for the holiday, definitely. And there's a different opinion in Rabbi Yosef and a different version in some places where he says, even you can tighten it, but a lot of also take out the word even and say tightening it's okay, which is a less work level. But he didn't think about the weaving. But the halacha is that we're allowed to weave the bed together if necessary. Make sense? Okay, and are you really glad you have a mattress to go home to?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, never forget the blessings we've got. All right, chapter 1, Mishnah 9. It's a really short one. Richard, would you mind?
Chapter 9?
Yeah, a Mishnah. Sorry, chapter 1, Mishnah 9. Sorry. The oven, yeah.
Chapter 8. Mishnah 9. They may set up an oven, a stove, or a millstone during a festival.
All right. So again, in the old days, how do you cook? Well, you've got to make an oven. Not go to Best Buy, not go to Home Depot. You had to make an oven. And those ovens didn't last, 10, 15, 20 years, although modern appliances don't last that long either. But the idea was that you would sometimes have to repair it or build it completely new. Imagining like building an old, the old style brick barbecue in your backyard, right? That's what people had to do. And the question is, Moed Katan, am I allowed to do this, right? It's definitely building work. It's significant work. But why? Because we need to have an oven in order to be able to eat. And eating on the festival and during the days of the festival is really, really important. Not just because we don't want to starve to death, but because the joy of the festival was always linked to having food. That was a very big part of the festival celebration.
Still is, right?
Oh, it still is, absolutely. But nowadays we just have to worry about, whether Winn-Dixie's going to run out of kosher brisket. Back then they had to worry about whether your oven had been properly, baked before you could bake the bread in it or on it. So the idea of doing the work necessary to build your kitchen, to literally build your kitchen to be able to celebrate, that's what they're trying to clear up. And again, we wouldn't be doing this on like the day of Chag itself, but on the day after, but before the whole festival is over, yes, it's permitted. And then similarly, there's a debate.
Rabbi Judah says they may not roughen millstones for the first time.
So if in the old days, you probably all know about like windmills and things like that. But in the old days, not everybody had a windmill. You just had a rock, and you'd have another rock that would sit on top of it. And usually there'd be like a crank or something. And this would sit in your lap. And you would grind the flour,
Wheat, yeah.
the wheat flour, exactly. But the stone, you had to roughen it up. So you would take and you would chisel the bottom of it to put teeth so that as you ground, there would be something for it to scrape on. And over time, you would have to put more teeth on it as it ground down because, the stone would be grinding against itself. So Rabbi Zehuda in this one, we're saying the first time, way too much chiseling to do the whole thing. He loses the argument, but he's trying to at least get us to consider how much building is too much building. And his opinion was that the first time that you had to roughen the stone was too much. If you were just fixing it a little bit because it had worn down, that would have been okay. Like I said, you are allowed to do it for the first time if you ever want to make your own millstone. But that's the principle that he's working off of. Good? Good. Gee, without Natan asking all the extra questions, we go too quickly. You guys have to speak up and ask. All right. Are you up for some reading?
Yes.
Okay.
They may put up a railing around a roof or a gallery porch in the style of an ordinary person, but not in the style of a professional.
Okay. So I hope that you know that it is a mitzvah to have a railing around your roof.
Yeah.
This is in the old days when you had a roof that was flat and people would be up on top of the roof. If you have a roof like that and no one goes up there, it's not a mitzvah. But if you have a flat roof and people go up and they walk around the roof and they dry things up there, they store things up there, or just live up there, then you have to have a railing. Otherwise, people will fall off and get hurt. So if I need to build a railing, can I do it during Moed Katan? And again, like the sewing, the idea here is, yes, you can go ahead and put a railing up there, but it shouldn't be a professional railing, right? Don't do it so elaborately and so perfectly and with so much extra work needed. Just put up something temporarily, and if
yellow tape.
maybe a little more than a caution tape, more than just a red cone that says danger, the roof edge. But we're finding the same style as we saw with the sewing question. And part 2 is going to be similar.
They may put plaster on crevices on the roof and flatten them down with a roller by hand or foot, but not using professional tools.
Right. So professional tools usually is considered to be like a roller with ropes. You would have your draw a circle this way, I'm a really bad artist. All right, so you have your roller, and there'd be a hole going through it, and this is like a heavy piece of stone. You'd haul this up on the roof. Remember, we talked about what happens when it falls and accidental death and all of that, maybe? Yeah. Remember a little bit? And then you would have a rope that would go through this, and you would pull the rope, and it would drag the roller across the plaster, across the stuff that you put to patch the holes in the roof. And that would make it nice and smooth and perfect because it's a nice heavy roller. That, no, not on Moed Katan, right? If you just want to push a little plaster into it and smooth it out by hand, or even use a hand roller, that's okay. But the big heavy roller, no. That's professional work. Wait until after the festival for that. Just put a temporary smush of plaster into the gap and stop the leak so that the rain isn't coming in on you. That's the main issue here. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Okay, part 3.
A hinge, a socket, a beam, a lock, a key which broke.
These are all parts of the door.
They may repair them during the festival, as long as he doesn't intend to do this work during the festival. All
right, so we get a very interesting and important principle here, right? It's still a little warm in here, isn't it? Yeah. And the principle that's being advanced here is, okay, I've got my door, and maybe the lock's broken, or maybe the beam is broken, or the sidebar is broken. I can't just leave my door like that because it's dangerous. What if someone wants to break in, or what if the animals come in, or what if my kids get out?
No, you can fix it.
That you can fix, but what they add is you have to only be doing that because you have to do it, not because you planned to do it and left the work to be done during the festival. Right, exactly. So once again, I love timelines because it gets things sort of clear. right? We have the actual festival. I'm just going to call it Yom Tov with a YT, and that's one day. And then we're going to have Chol Moed, right? Which is, we'll just do CM for that period. And this is the time we're talking about. So if my door, let's switch colors, hold on. If my door breaks, then I can fix it. Yay, right? That's fine. But I need one more color, but I don't. Right, hold on. Someone brought me colors. Look at that. I got green. Okay, but if my door breaks here,
I'm too busy.
and I'm too busy, or I say, well, you know, next week is the festival. I have off, right? I got so much time for my chores that I can do that next week.
No.
And you want to postpone the fix to here, right? And no, you can't do that, right? You cannot do work during the festival that you could have done before the festival. That's a very important principle, right? Is that you can't do work during the festival that you could have done before the festival. And by the way, that also extends to the issue of food preparation on the festival, right? As we talked about just a little bit at the beginning here, and maybe we've studied together, depending upon who I'm looking at. On the Yom Tov day, we are allowed to cook, but you're not allowed to do things to prepare to cook that you could have done easily without diminishing the quality of the cooking before Yom Tov itself, right? So it's up to each person, it's up to each recipe, you know, whether you need to have fresh pepper or whether you could have ground the pepper yesterday. That depends on the recipe and the quality of the cooking. But if there's something you could have done yesterday, then you should have done it yesterday before the holiday began. So it's all about thinking ahead, planning for the holiday, making sure that you are minimizing the things that might disturb the pleasure of the holiday with work. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, hammer out that last little bit.
And all the pickled food that he may eat during the festival, he may pickle.
All right, so you're got a bunch of, you know, cucumbers or other things that you need to pickle, you know, put into the jars with the salt water or vinegar. You can do that work, even though it's packing the jars. You can do that as long as the pickles could be ready during the festival, right? So if I start pickling here, right, let's make that a pickle, and then I'm going to eat here, bing, no problem.
During the festival.
Because my eating is during the festival.
Okay.
If I'm pickling here and I don't plan to eat them until next August,
Oh, then.
that's just doing work, right? So food preparation, even if it's delayed, that's okay. Food preparation because you're storing up for next winter, that's not what the festival's for.
Rabbi, Hol HaMoed, that's the day between on Pesach.
Right, between the start and last, yes.
But is any other
Sukkot.
Sukkot?
Yes.
On Sukkot.
From first day of Sukkot
Thursday,
before Shmini Atzeret begins.
that's only the
That's it. We're talking about all of this, and it's only 2 weeks a year.
Pesach and Sukkot.
Pesach and Sukkot are the only holidays that have Chol Moed, yes. Any other questions? All right, so goodbye, Chapter 1. Thank you very much. Hello, Chapter 2. Chapter 2, we are continuing the same idea of what work is and isn't permitted during this time. Yoel, are you up for reading?
English, no. So,
Start where it says Mishnah 1.
If one hand turneth his olive, and morning or some
Unforeseen.
Circumstances before him or workman mislead him, he might during the festival put on the beam for the first time and leave it until after the festival. The word of Rabbi Huda.
Perfect. We'll stop there because let's make sure we understand what's going on. All right. So you're an olive farmer, or you've got a few olive trees on your farm. Maybe it's not your main farm, but it's there. How do you take care of olives? Well, you pick the olives, but then usually they would ripen off the tree before you would press them. By the way, in the ancient world, most people didn't eat olives. Most people would juice the olives. They'd get the oil from the olives. That was much more important than the meat of the olives. So how do you do that? Well, you have an olive press. You've got a big box that you put all the olives in, and then you put something heavy on top. And the heaviness will squeeze them down. But before you can do that, you have to sort of mix them up in this. You have to keep turning them and turning them to get them to soften and ripen and get ready for the press. So the question is, this takes time. And we just talked about doing things in advance before the holiday begins. But what if I was planning everything right? I had it all planned out. I knew I was going to do this, let's say, on Sunday. And the holiday was going to start on Tuesday. So I've got my schedule. And Sunday comes around and something happens, right? I get sick. Or the workmen that I hired don't show up for the work. And I can't find anyone else to do the job. Well, now I'm in the middle of the festival. And if I don't take care of this now, I'm going to lose all the olives, right? They're going to go bad. I won't be able to get the oil out of them. It's going to be a huge loss. And it wasn't because I didn't plan, right? It wasn't because I was trying to do this during the festival. It's just an accident. It happened. What's the law? So Rabbi Yehuda says it's okay. You can go ahead and take care of them, but he puts a limit that you can turn them. And I'm trying to remember how he phrased it. And you can put the beam on it for the first time and just like let it do its first run of pressing, right? Just a little bit. Whereas Rabbi Yosef, whom the halacha follows, says, no, you can go ahead. Just do the job as needs to be done, right? You would have done it before the festival began, something that kept you from doing it. You can go ahead and do it during the festival and finish off the job, because otherwise there's a chance that this is going to be spoiled and ruined and lost, and it's okay.
Who wins the argument?
Rabbi Yossi wins this argument.
Okay.
So you're allowed to go ahead and do everything you need to siphon off the oil, stick it in the jugs, seal the jars, do the regular job of olives.
Just in case he's not thinking to do it on holiday.
Exactly. It wasn't his plan, right? His plan was do it early, but that's what they say, onus, something unforeseen happened. He was planning to do it and his car broke down, so he couldn't get home. He was planning to do it and the workmen, they didn't show up, or they showed up and they didn't do the job properly. And so it all got pushed back and delayed. Then yes, you can do it. But the guy who just says, I'll do it next week, I've got lots of time, and not allowed. Now, again, I don't know how many times, I should be keeping score, how many times in this class we have talked about how this is a very important principle in Jewish law, that your intention matters, right? What you think you're doing makes a difference, right? It's not just like mechanics. It's not like physics. If I think the pen falls, if I don't think the pen falls, the pen still falls, because gravity is a kind of law that always happens every time. Jewish law is the mix of the physical world and the spiritual world, and therefore the individual's decisions often have a big impact on what the law will be for that person in that circumstance. So you can imagine two guys waiting in line to talk to the Beit Din, to the court, and the first one explains, well, I was going to do this, but the car broke down, couldn't do it, the workers didn't show up, blah, 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 blah. And the Beit Din would say, it's a fine, go ahead, take care of it tomorrow, right? And the next guy shows up and says, great, this is easy. And he says, hey, yeah, I was planning to do it now because I got time off, and it's okay, right? And the Beit Din would say, nope, not for you, because that was your plan. It just doesn't work like that. I think our most recent example was when we were talking about Yoma with Yom Kippur, and the idea that if somebody says, I'll sin and Yom Kippur will take care of it for me, Yom Kippur does nothing, right? If you say, I'm not going to sin, but you sin anyway, Yom Kippur will take care of you with everything else we talked about of tshuva and repentance. So what you're thinking when you're doing something makes a big difference. All right. We are back around the table. Mishnah 2.
Want me to do it?
No, it's we go all the way around.
Similarly, if one had his wine.
Oh wait, did I?
Yeah, he skipped.
I skipped the last line. Sorry. I talked about part
Yeah,
two,
you talked
but I didn't
about
let you
it,
read
but
part
you
two.
didn't
See, I
read it.
interrupted and I forgot. So yeah, go ahead and read out part two. We have to make sure we hear it officially.
Rabbi Joseph.
Yeah.
Rabbi Joseph say, he's my pour of the oil and complete the process and seal the heart in his usual way.
Exactly. We talked about that. But yes, I should have waited until it was read officially into the record. But yes, so Rabbi Yossi is the one who ultimately wins, and we can go ahead and do it again as long as that wasn't your plan, but it just happened that way. Now, chapter 2, Mishnah 2, same idea, different produce.
Similarly, if one had his wine already in the cistern, and morning or some unforeseen circumstance befell him, or workmen misled him, he may draw off the wine, complete the process, and seal the jars in his usual way, the words of Rabbi Yossi.
All right, so again, very much similar to what we just said, except now Rabbi Yossi is speaking first, but he has the same opinion, which is if something happened and the wine that you put in, I guess that should be blue, the wine you put in is not being pulled out before the holiday like it was supposed to, then even though the holiday began, not on the Yom Tov, but for the rest of the time, you're allowed to go ahead and pull out all the juice and put it into the jars and seal the jars and do the whole thing. Whereas, I almost did it again. Whereas part 2 says,
Rabbi Yehuda says he may only cover the cistern with boards to prevent it from turning into vinegar.
right? So he doesn't want it to go sour because the wine will go bad. So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is as long as you cover it, that's good enough. Now, again, Rabbi Yehuda loses this argument. Rabbi Yossi's opinion is the one that becomes halacha, that you are allowed to go ahead and siphon off the wine and properly store it during the festival, as long as that wasn't your plan.
It will get really bad, no matter even.
I mean, remember, we're talking a week here. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is where we are. Pretty, what's that? Mishnah 3. Yep.
You ready, Richard?
Yes. The man may bring his produce indoors for fear of thieves, and withdraw his flax from the soaking pool to prevent it spoiling, as long as he doesn't intend to do this work during the festival.
All right. So again, we get the repeat of don't intend to do this during the festival. This shouldn't be your plan. But if your produce is out there and you realize, people are saying there are people going around stealing the stuff in the fields, normally I wouldn't go out to bring it in during the festival, but because there's a new danger, I would. And same thing with the flax, which is what you make linen from, the type of cloth that's made from plants, right? You can also bring that in if there's going to be a problem, because you would soak the linen in special containers, and if you leave it too long, it would break down, it would fall apart. So that you can also bring in if necessary. And then we get the general principle.
And all those who deliberately intend to do their work on the festival, they must leave it to spoil.
Okay, so if you thought you were going to use the festival to do your makeup work, now there's actually 2 different ways to interpret this last phrase of leaving it to spoil. One interpretation is kind of the way it translates here, which is you just should leave it, which is a little difficult to understand, because the person who thinks that they're going to do the work during the festival is not the kind of person who's just going to leave it to spoil, because they were already planning to violate the festival. So what? They're going to suddenly change their mind, and they're going to change their mind when it costs them? So there's another interpretation of the same words, that the loss that's being described here isn't the spoilage that comes because you just leave it alone, but it's what happens because the Beit Din, the community, takes it from you, right? If you are going out to bring in your wine, and you shouldn't have because you have plenty of time, you can be fined. The community can go out, they can empty your cistern and just throw it in the river. And this is a way of the government, if you will, the Beit Din, the community, punishing people who are violating the festival. because that was not permitted to be done during the community. And there were certain steps that the holiday in the right feeling. And that may sound harsh, but it's also a very important question of being together, of being cohesive. If we're trying to be together, we need to share a certain, pardon me, a certain feeling during this holiday. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we are now on, we're just flying through this. Chapter 2, Mishnah 4.
They may not purchase houses, slaves, or cattle unless it is for the needs of the festival or the need of the seller who does not have enough to eat.
Okay, big ticket items were always considered to be too much trouble for a festival, right? That's too much work. But if you need a house, or you need someone to help you with festival preparations, or you need to buy an animal to slaughter to eat for the festival, that's okay. And in the same way, if there's somebody who needs to sell a cow because they need the money to buy what they need for the rest of the festival, you can buy his cow to help him out. Right? It's a very, I love that second part because it's a very interesting look at how purchasing happens, right? I can't just give you money because it's good for you and good for me. Because during the festival, neither one of us should be doing this kind of work. But if I don't have enough money to just give you the tzedakah, or maybe you won't take tzedakah, but I know you're not going to have enough cash to be able to buy food and buy wine and be able to celebrate the rest of the holiday, I can buy a sheep from you, and that's good for me, kind of, but mostly it's good for you, right? And I don't really need the sheep for my own celebration. I've got plenty that I can eat, but if I don't buy your sheep, you won't have any cash. And so I can go ahead and give you the money in this way, even though it's the festival. Well, it's not a loophole. It's saying there are needs of the festival, and sometimes the needs of the festivals are the needs of the people. And there's work we can do to meet the needs of the people, even though for other reasons we wouldn't have done it. And that it's not a loophole. It's as we keep talking and finding out, you have to drill down to the motivation. Why are you buying the goat? Right? Are you buying the goat because you want a goat? Are you buying the goat because you want the goat for the festival? Are you buying the goat to help the seller enjoy the festival? Right? All three of those cases, money and goat, but all three of those cases, there's one answer for the first and a different answer for the second two categories. Right? If you're just buying the goat because you want a new goat, you don't do it during these days. You're buying the goat because you need the goat for the festival. You're buying the goat to help the seller of the goat. Go ahead. No problem. Motivation matters. Make sense? Okay. Part 2.
They may not move belongings from one house to another house, but he may move his belongings within his courtyard.
All right. So anybody who's ever moved house, moving your house is a pain. And remember, this is before people had U-Haul. So if you're lucky, you're moving it with a wagon or maybe with a donkey, but chances are you're moving it with your back.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is way too much work. On the other hand, if you're moving it from one part of your house out into the courtyard so you can clean the house or do other things in the house, or maybe you have guests coming so you want to move something out to make room for them, that's okay. But moving from one house to a totally different house, we don't do that on the festival. Make sense? Pretty straightforward for that one. And part 3.
They may not bring back vessels from the house of the craftsman, but if one is anxious about them, he may remove them to another courtyard.
Okay, so boom, 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 boom. We're going to need a timeline for this one, I think. And I like timeline. All right, so we got our timeline, and we've got, I take my spoon to the craftsman. I have to take my spoon to get it fixed, right? My spoon has a crack in it, and so now it's leaking. So I take the spoon to the blacksmith. So he's going to fix my spoon. But then, right, it's Yom Tov. The holiday begins. And now we've got our Chol Moed time again. The question is, can I go to the blacksmith to pick it up here, right? Am I allowed to pick up my spoon from the blacksmith during the festival? And the answer is no, right? Even though I took it in before, and even though he might have done the work before, it is giving the wrong impression of doing the work during that time. And it's also giving the wrong impression of like engaging in regular business during that time, even though all I'm doing is picking it up, right? It's like getting something from the dry cleaners that's already done. It still doesn't matter. It gives the wrong impression. And so the spoon has to wait. Now, the second half there, if there are lots of spoon robbers that are going around the area, you know, the great spoon thieves, then you are allowed to pick it up and move it to somewhere safer than the blacksmith's shop. You are allowed to move the spoon, but you can't take it back to your house and, you know, use it like you were bringing it back for regular business life kind of activity.
Even if you need the spoon to cook and all that?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep, because it's too much of engagement in the interaction, which is a good reminder. Get your spoon fixed before the festival starts. Remember, all the things where we now are finding out where we say no during Chol Moed, these are all a reminder of do it before. I've had people who have asked us, you know, well, Rabbi, how do you celebrate Shabbat on Saturday afternoon and evening if you can't cook, right? I mean, how do you have a nice meal if you can't, you know, use the stove and you can't cook things and all of that? And I say, well, before I got married, I'd say I cook everything on Friday. Now that I'm married, I say Penelope cooks everything on Friday because she's a better cook than me. Thank God. But it's very simple. If you prepare ahead of time, you don't have these problems. And if there is a big problem, you know, it was all prepared and everything was perfect, as you can see, there are leniencies that are allowed. And of course, the ultimate leniency is you ask a friend, right? Hey, man, my spoon suddenly broke during Chol Moed. Can I borrow a spoon? No problem. That was, you know, that was your solution. Good?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Joel, we are Mishnah 5.
They might cover drying food with straw.
Straw. Go ahead and do part A as well.
Rabbi Yehuda say they might even be pair the fruit in her.
Right, in heaps, right?
Yeah.
So welcome to being a farmer, right? To understand the Mishnah, you really have to understand farming because otherwise we don't know what they're talking about. So figs, one of my favorite fruits, which are really hard to get good figs unless you have a fig tree. Figs at the supermarket, they're just not good, so usually. But figs, you would want to dry out because otherwise you have to eat them straight away.
Spoiled.
Right? Do you guys eat figs? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem why figs are
Only the ones that
yeah, it's not even
The same.
close. Yeah.
Okay.
We had friends in Mexico when I was growing up. They had a fig tree and next to their swimming pool. And I used to climb up into the tree and just sit like a monkey eating from the branches. Then go swim and then climb back up the tree. And it was amazing. The Corrales, they were a lovely family. But figs, they get ripe and then they go rotten really, really fast if you're not careful. And so you would have to dry them out. But of course, while they're drying out, there are going to be bugs and there are going to be animals and there are going to be things falling from the sky. So you would cover them with straw, like hay, in order to keep them clean. And so the question is, I've got my figs out to dry during Chol Moed. Can I put the hay, can I put the straw on top of them and cover them? And the answer is yes, absolutely you can do that. Because otherwise it's a big loss. Now, what's Rabbi Yehuda add to this? He says, even if the figs aren't piled up yet, you're able to pile them up and then put the straw on top of them, right? So he's saying you can do even a little bit more work than that first opinion that is being described. Make sense? Okay. Similar idea about what you can and can't do and where the limits are, we do in part 2.
Seller of produce, clothing, and other wares
Vessels, like pots, pans.
Might serve privately for the requirement of the festival.
All right. So let's imagine I sell pots, right? During the festival, I'm not going to do my job because I'm not going to open up my shop and be selling my pots and pans. But if somebody needs a pot or a spoon, I'm allowed to sell that during the festival privately, right? I'm not going to be out on the marketplace saying, get your pots here, get your pots. Instead, someone's going to come and knock on my house and say, hey, man, my pot broke last night and I need something for tonight's dinner. I'll say, okay, yeah, come on. I'll help you get a pot. Privately, discreetly, quietly. Now, yes, I can take care and help you, but only because you need it for the festival. If you come to me and say, hey, I want to buy 100 pots because I'm going to load them on a boat and take them to Spain and sell them there, not doing that. Not. It has to be just for the needs of the festival. Make sense? Okay. Part 3, also similar.
Droppers of fish and bird, gross, market, and grease, mayor, might, and gay in their work, privately for the requirement of the festival.
All right, so maybe you're a trapper, right? You get fish, you get birds, and then you slaughter them and people eat them. Or maybe you're a groat maker, which means you are a wheat pounder, or you are a miller, which means you're grinding up the mill. Because of the food connection, if people need to buy your birds or buy your fish or buy your flour, then yes, you can do that for the festival. Again, you're not going to sell someone 5,000 birds because no one's eaten 5,000 birds in 1 week. But if someone needs a couple extra doves, that's okay for you to do your business. Again, privately, not walking down the marketplace, saying, who wants to buy some doves? But people need them. They know who to go to, and you can help them. Does that make sense? Okay. And last one.
Rabbi Joseph says the word strict upon their servers.
They were strict upon themselves, right? So what does that mean? Rabbi Yossi says, yes, that is the halacha, but the average worker said, I know I could, but I won't, right? So someone comes and knocks on their door and says, hey, I need to buy a pot. Say, yeah, it's Chol Moed. I really don't want to open up the shop. I'm sorry, no. They would be strict to not do the business, even if they were permitted to do the business. Now, does that mean if the next guy wants to do it, that it's bad? No, of course, right? The halacha says you can do this if you do it in this way. But if you choose to be stricter, that was also okay. Now you can begin to see some of the tension, right? What happens if everybody chooses to be strict? Then the people who need them, what are they going to do, right? If I would need to buy 2 doves to make my dinner, and all the dove sellers are being strict, then I've got no food for my dinner. It works out if everybody knows what everybody's doing, right? If I know that all the pot sellers are strict, and all of the dove sellers are strict, and all of the blacksmiths are strict, then I'll take care of everything before the holiday begins. It's as long as I know my community and my community knows me, everyone can be happy. If we don't know each other, or if we're all anonymous, that's when things go bad. It's all built around the idea that we're in this together, and we're going to have a great time together because we planned together. Make sense?
Yep.
Makes sense. All right, we're done for tonight, guys.
Wow.
Zip through it because I didn't think we were going to get that far through, so I didn't photocopy chapter 3. But we'll leave it there. We'll finish up chapter 3 next week, I'm sure. Come on, machine.
That was easy. That was the first Mishnah that is easy.